Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. Broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain and now snowy plain of Indiana. So, folks, we're talking about global warming this week. Again, I know we talk about this issue a lot on this show, but it's extremely important because it is why you pay so much for electricity today in the state of Indiana, because the GOP establishment, along with the Democrat Party, has bought into the Green New Deal scam that demonized coal and pushed wind and solar farms on Hoosiers. The results are crystal clear. You are paying 17 cents a kilowatt for electricity. In contrast, Kentucky, which is, of course, a coal-producing state just like Indiana, they never bought into it. They still produce most of their electricity from coal. They pay 12 cents per kilowatt, 5 cents per kilowatt less than Indiana. So, folks, it's speak the truth and shame the devil. You hear so much about green energy being inexpensive. Well, listen to this. We've all changed out our incandescent light bulbs now, mostly for LED bulbs, which use far less energy, but your electric bills go higher and higher. Why is that? It's because, point of fact, solar and wind is extremely expensive, and it gets sold on us as being cheaper because of the subsidies that you and I have to pay. So, because of the subsidies you and I as taxpayers have to pay. That's what makes the Green New Deal grift go, is the subsidies. It's not the actual electricity production, it's all a scam. They are in it just for the gravy train from Washington, D.C., but you are paying for it. And it's why our deficit keeps going up and up, because politicians like Jim Banks and Todd Young keep voting for this crap that is exponentially more expensive than coal. So, folks, here's the headline this past week from the Washington Post, where low temperature records from the 1800s may be broken this week, and it shows a photograph of a poor soul walking along Lake Michigan in Chicago on Saturday. You can just barely make out a lighthouse out on the shore, and this person's walking along the beach, or trying to, through the blowing snow. So you remember, so we all remember it's global warming and we will never see snow again. Now the temperatures are cold, and so they're saying, well, that's global warming too. If it rains, it's global warming. If it doesn't rain, it's global warming. If it snows, it's global warming. If it doesn't snow, it's global warming. Remember the polar bears, folks. Remember Al Gore speaking about those in the 1990s, where the polar bears were going to disappear. Well, we all know now there are more polar bears now than they have ever recorded. The polar bears are just fine, folks. But the backdrop on all this is, and this is from Peter Clack, we just had a major global warming summit in Brazil. This is from Peter Clack, Dateline Belém. 1 week after COP30, private jets gone. Raw sewage still runs in the streets. The shiny new Freedom Avenue is already a smuggler's highway for illegal timber and cocaine. The 56,000 delegates partied on in floating five-star hotels, then vanished. The bill, $2 billion for a ghost convention center and a 13-kilometer scar through the rainforest that's already driven deforestation alerts up 15%. Where's any binding end to deforestation? Days before COP, Brazil approved oil drilling at the Amazon River's mouth. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Indigenous leaders were paraded out, storming the venue, kids bearing fossil fuels in a mock funeral, banners screaming, "Our forest is not for sale." It was beautiful, yet the chainsaws are louder than ever, and Belém remains forgotten. So, folks, it's all a scam. Again, folks, the far-left government of Brazil is right now authorizing drilling for oil in the Amazon River's mouth. That tells you everything. It's always rules for thee, but never for me. And that sounds just like any career politician, doesn't it? Folks, I believe myself that global warming, it's a religion. It's a religion of global warming, and this is because it's a viewpoint that environmentalism, particularly concerning climate change, has taken on the characteristics of a religion, complete with dogma, guilt, and a promise of salvation through sustainable practices. That sounds like a religion to me. Remember, these are the arguments I'm making that global warming is a religion. I would argue that the prevailing view on global warming requires a belief on faith treating CO2 as a toxic pollutant, despite its role in plant growth, and portraying it as a tenet of this religion. Sin and salvation. This perspective suggests a narrative of human sin, aka pollution, leading to a coming judgment with the sustainability offered as a form of salvation or redemption. Evangelism and heretics. The idea of climate change is constantly propagated, and those who question the dominant narrative are sometimes actually labeled as heretics or deniers. Folks, I think this global warming religion replaces traditional religious religion and has become the new religion of choice for many and need another altar to worship at. I've been sounding the alarm on this now for a year on Freedom 95 here on this radio station, and voters are showing their opposition now to the net zero climate agenda whenever they get the chance. And you know why? It's because our power bills are going up exponentially. This is from WTHR TV. Indiana power bills are increasing faster than any other state in the country. Folks, you heard that right. Our electric bills in the state of Indiana are increasing faster than any other state in our union. That is insanity. From WTHR.com. This report found that Hoosiers' electric bills will go up an average 16.3% this year. Folks, remember, they went up 17% last year and 9% the year before that. And again, I want to repeat, folks, Kentucky on average pays 12 cents per kilowatt. We are at 17 cents here in Indiana because of this Green New Deal grift. But everyone says, oh, the solar panels, that's where it's at. Well, folks, listen to what Denmark has done. Denmark has completely bought into the Green New Deal grift way more than we have, but we are going down that road, unfortunately, in the state of Indiana. Did you know that Denmark now has to import 80% of their electricity in July? That's the downside of being a quote-unquote wind leader. When the wind doesn't blow, folks, there's no electricity being produced, and you have to get the electricity from somewhere else. And folks, I'm a chicken farmer. My family's been in the egg business since the late 1940s. I know all about wind energy not being sustainable. We have a chicken farm in Newton County, Indiana, and at times we get asked by the power company to please run our generators because they don't have enough electricity for all consumers. And so we are asked to run our diesel generators to help balance the supply. And we do that at times. We want to be good neighbors. But the answer, folks, is to have reliable energy for everyone. And that's just not happening in the state of Indiana. This is from President Donald J. Trump. I hate green tax credits in the great big beautiful bill. They are largely a giant scam. I would much prefer that we use this money to be used elsewhere. Again, this is a direct quote from Donald J. Trump. Anywhere would be preferable. Windmills and the rest of this junk are the most expensive and inefficient energy in the world. It's destroying the beauty of the environment and is 10 times more costly than any other energy. None of it works without massive government subsidy. Energy should not need a subsidy. Amen, I agree. And also, he's on point on this as well. It is almost exclusively made in China. It's time to break away finally from this craziness. Absolutely an amen. Folks, I know you're hearing radio ads on all kinds of radio stations across our state that talk about how coal is more expensive. But again, that's an absolute lie. They don't factor in all of the subsidies that you and I are having to pay for. Speak the truth and shame the devil. Kentucky has one of the cheapest electric rates in the United States, 12 cents per kilowatt, and they burn coal. Indiana has massive wind farms and solar farms now, and our electricity has jumped to 17 cents per kilowatt. That says everything. Folks, we must defend Indiana and America's independence against this climate lunacy that has undermined our country. Indiana is still pushing all these crazy solar farms, but listen to this. Spain is now openly worried about voltage swings caused by these renewables. And remember the blackout last summer, folks, when Spain lost all their electricity for the entire country. It was because the conditions that led to it were a persistent problem for the stability of Spain's power network. That's fancy speak for when the sun shines, solar works, and when the wind blows, wind energy works. But when the wind stops blowing, there's no electricity. And at night, your solar panels aren't doing you a bit of good. So folks, we're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to get right back into this illusion of imaginary problems, climate change. It's all hogwash. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, the right station for talk. So, folks, we're talking about this giant imaginary problem, this giant hoax, global warming. And we were talking about these windmills. This is from Wide Awake Media. According to ex-climate alarmist Tom Harris, wind turbines require a backup fossil fuel plant that continues burning 90% of the time, making the wind turbine largely unnecessary and, in essence, just for show. This is a far cry from the environmentally friendly image that is presented to the public. So what he's saying, folks, is whenever you see one of these windmills, even when they are turning, there's probably a coal plant or a natural gas plant somewhere actually burning on standby to produce the electricity that we really need for whenever the wind stops blowing. And it's all because carbon is demonized. There's nothing wrong with carbon. Remember, folks, wedding bands are usually made with a beautiful piece of coal on them, a diamond, pure carbon. Diamonds are a wonderful thing. Coal is a wonderful thing. So something is a scam when the large mega corporations are pushing it for their own gain. Listen to this. This is from ExxonMobil, one of the world's largest oil companies. It says the world needs ways to reduce carbon. Carbon capture for industry. Let's deliver. Folks, they are in on the scam just as much as anyone else because they're profiting from it. They have a vested interest in making everything they produce more expensive so they can make more money from you. And that's why all these giant corporations like Exxon are pushing it, because they're in on the take. And again, look at who they donate money to. This is from Steve Malloy. The ridiculous ExxonMobil CEO should stick to producing oil and gas. Number one, this is from Steve Malloy. Darren Woods frets President Trump's attack on the offshore wind industry, fearing the next Democrat regime will do the same to the oil and gas industry. That's hogwash. Of course, the Obama regime destroyed 50% of the coal industry, and the Biden regime took aim at the oil and gas industry. As things stand, the next Democrat regime will return to persecuting the oil and gas industry through a revived climate hoax. But Woods and the rest of the oil like the climate hoax. As oil and gas is essential to our society, the only question is price. Climate regulation, ironically, allows big oil to profiteer off OPEC control of the price of oil versus the United States control via energy dominance policies. This is why, for example, big oil opposes the Trump EPA rescission of the Obama EPA endangerment finding for greenhouse gases. Instead of giving anti-Trump and anti-energy interviews, Woods should spend his free time making sure that climate hoax is dead as a doornail. Again, that's from Steve Malloy on Twitter. Folks, these giant oil companies are not your friend. They are in it to make as much money as they can so they can pay their executives as much as they can. That's all it's about. This is from Marcus Villig on Twitter. Did you know that China now emits 4 times as much CO2 as the entire European Union? But remember, from Peter Clack, CO2 has 0 scientifically proven consequential influence on climate. Folks, this demonization of carbon, again, your diamond ring is made from carbon. Guess what else is made from carbon? You are. I can't believe how easy it was for these climate alarmists, these global warming fearmongers, to convince human beings who are carbon-based life forms that carbon is the enemy. It is absolutely not the enemy. Without carbon, folks, we would not exist. This is from Chris Martz. You are the carbon alarmists want to reduce. And he's referring to this incredibly stupid headline on CNN Health from October 6, 2025. It says, climate pollution from inhalers has the impact of 500,000 cars per year, study finds. Folks, they're going after people's asthma inhalers. What quacks. They don't care about human beings. They only care about the Green New Deal grift and scaring people because that is their bread and butter. They make their money off of scaring you. So they have to keep continuously saying how horrible human beings are. And that's quite a statement to say how horrible human beings are. The global explorer Jacques Cousteau, well, he was in on it too. He was a consultant for the United Nations and World Bank, and he said this for the 1991 UNESCO Courier Conference. World population must be stabilized, and to do that, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. My God, folks, these people are so anti-human. So they're coming after you. They're coming after your dogs. Listen to this. This is from Fortune, published October 14th, 2025 by an article by Kaylee Wells. Your dog is part of the climate change problem. I can adopt 100 bunnies that will not be close to the emissions of a dog because my dog is a carnivore. Folks, these are just examples of the lunacy this religion has taken on to try to perpetuate fear. It's all about the fear of carbon, and there's no need to fear carbon. But Democrats and establishment Republicans, not conservative Republicans, establishment Republicans, keep buying into this. Philadelphia, this is from Wall Street Apes. Philadelphia Democrats bought 25 new battery-powered buses that cost $24 million. That's $1 million per bus. They didn't work, so the city quietly put them into a lot and decommissioned them. The lot caught fire and destroyed them. A massive fire broke out that destroyed dozens of these buses parked and revealed a major boondoggle that the city is trying to keep quiet. So this story starts back in 2019 when Philadelphia bought 25 new battery-powered buses that cost $24 million. Again, almost $1 million each. Well, folks, guess who paid for those? That was a federal grant. That was part of the Green New Deal grift. And that's why our nation's debt keeps going up and up, because we get pushed this lie that we have to be carbon free, that we have to go to electric buses and electric cars. I am 100% for an electric car. If you want an electric car, fantastic, wonderful. But you shouldn't ask your neighbor or anyone else to have to subsidize it. It should be based on the free market, on whether you like the performance of that electric car. Tesla has some wonderful self-driving technology that makes owning one of their vehicles something to consider just on the performance and ease of use and convenience. But your neighbors shouldn't be forced to help you pay for it. And when I say your neighbors, that's taxpayers all across the country. There should not be any special subsidies for electric cars versus a gasoline car or any other type of car. Let the free market work it all out. But on the subject of these electric cars, Great Britain is, unfortunately, they have went way down the road on this. Their electric rates are exorbitant. Did you know, folks, that the United Kingdom dumps over 20 million used tires a year in India, about 350,000 tons? 70% of the tires are then burned to extract crude oil, black carbon, and scrap steel. That's kicking out poisonous emissions. So we're saying we're recycling tires and saving the planet. It's a con. And folks, it is getting so bad in Great Britain. And this is actually a headline in the United Kingdom. Funerals should comply with net zero, says the Labour Party. New rules could ban gas cremation ovens and introduce eco-friendly coffins. So folks, no more cremation and only eco-friendly coffins, aka you're going to get a recycled paper box, aka we can all look forward to a recycled corrugated box someday. But again, it's all on the demonization of human life and enjoying life. Listen to this, folks. This is a headline from the Associated Press. Some air travelers bothered by their flight's emissions turn to carbon offsets. Do they work? That's from an article by Kaylee Wells in the Associated Press on September 29, 2025. Well, the short answer is no. This is from Steve Malloy. Nope, climate science aside, CO2 offsets don't work for the airline industry. For example, airliners emit 53 pounds of CO2 per mile. Trees absorb about 48 pounds of CO2 per year. Delta Airlines emits about 27 million tons per year. It would take 56 million trees growing for 20 years to offset a single year of Delta emissions. And that's just one airline out of all the airlines in the world. Folks, remember, just you and me and every human being on this planet today, we will all breathe out 2 pounds of CO2 ourselves today. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing for trees. It's a wonderful thing for the environment. It's a wonderful thing to grow crops because we want to eat. We want to produce the corn and soybeans that feed the cattle and the chickens that produce the eggs and produce the cows so that you and I can have a wonderful ribeye steak. Yum. But the climate alarmists don't want you to enjoy that steak. You know, they say cows are bad, but now there's studies popping up everywhere that debunk all that entirely. And it's all based on this myth of global warming. You know, this is from Chris Martz. If global warming were actually harmful as claimed, we would be seeing mass migration to Canada or Norway. Instead, people prefer to live where it's warmer, which is why most people are still moving to the south. That is why people still prefer to vacation in the tropics. The planet is not dangerously overheating, and anyone who claims otherwise is a liar. You know, folks, remember, this is from Steve Malloy. He calls it the noble lie. When Al Gore accepted his Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, he predicted Arctic ice would be gone by 2014. This year, there was almost 250,000 square miles more ice than there was in 2007. Folks, in 2025, we have way more. You know, it's all a myth, and it's all to promote a religion based on falsehoods. So, folks, we're out of time for this segment, but when we come back, I'm going to get into a little bit what John Kerry had to say. He says, we've got to cut down on farming due to climate change. Our people are going to starve. Good grief, what in the heck are people going to eat if you don't have farmers? This is John Rust. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show on Freedom 95, broadcasting all across the beautiful state of Indiana. So, folks, before the break, we were talking about how John Kerry said we've got to cut down on farming due to climate change. Our people are going to starve. You know, what a moron. If you don't have farmers, you don't have food. Pure and simple. And no one is arguing the climate does not change. It absolutely changes. The world used to be much warmer than it is today. Remember, folks, when Vikings lived in Greenland, the climate was warm enough to grow barley. This was published in 2012. It says, Vikings grew barley in Greenland. A sensational find at the bottom of an ancient rubbish heap in Greenland shows that Vikings grew barley on the island over 1,000 years ago. But the climatologists of today are saying, no, we have to freeze frame the climate as exactly what it is today, and there can be no change. Folks, the climate will always change. Folks, the climate is driven by the sun, and everything will be okay. We do not need to mess with it. We should just go on living our lives. You know, it's a made-up problem for socialists and communists to try to push government control over every aspect of your life, or indeed to end your life, because they believe there are too many humans on the planet. Again, we get sold this bill of goods that somehow coal's bad, but listen to this. Did you know, this is from Steve Malloy, the Alps were ice-free 6,000 years ago? Way before any coal plants, way before any SUVs or cheeseburgers. You know, the global warming activists, they spin everything to make it look like, oh, it's something new and caused by you. But, you know, the world goes on, the world changes. You know, yes, some glaciers are shrinking, but a lot of them are actually getting exponentially much larger. Today, you know, look at our polar ice caps. They are massively growing. You know, this is from an article back in 2005 in USA Today, 20 years ago. And the headline is, Global Warming Activists Turn Storms into Spin. And this is from USA Today. It says, our views, scientific link, both skimpy and contradicted by meteorologists. And it's talking about hurricanes. We just came off a hurricane season. There were none that had any impact on the United States. There were none that had any significant impact at all. But if you listen to the popular media, we were all going to be just devastated by hurricane after hurricane. And not one hit this year. Again, folks, in life, always follow the money. Listen to this. Las Vegas spent $5 billion, with a B, billion dollars on mirrors that collect sunlight. That energy plant only makes $30 million a year. The money laid out for that, how much juice do you get for the squeeze? For these people, it's all for the squeeze, and the squeeze is on you because you have to pay for it. Someone had to pay for those $5 billion in mirrors, and that's all through subsidies. And that's all through federal grants, and that's why our nation's debt keeps skyrocketing, because these career politicians think it's wonderful. And it all goes back to the basic question of global warming. This is from Steve Malloy. When I began working on climate 29 years ago, we were told the science was settled. Today, I learned from Nature magazine that it's really not. Predictions are uncertain. That's why we have to keep funding useless climate hoaxers. And folks, what he's talking about is this headline in Nature magazine that said, just how bad will climate change get? The only way to know is to fund more research. It's all about the money. Again, from Peter Clack. There is no sign of fossil fuel in CO2 emissions could be found in the past 40 years, according to a report by the National Technical University of Athens. The landmark study refutes almost every claim from the United Nations Global Warming Campaign. For example, there are no change in the CO2 signatures since the Little Ice Age, and human society was indistinguishable from all natural factors. Proxy data suggests the modern period doesn't differ from earlier centuries, yet political agendas from the United Nations still promote the narrative that they own the science. Folks, we went over Al Gore's polar bears. There's more polar bears now than ever. And remember how they say that the oceans are rising and we're all going to drown? Since Greta Thunberg was born, sea levels at Stockholm, Sweden, have fallen about 10 centimeters. It's the exact opposite. The hysteria about Arctic sea ice disappearing began in 2007 when some unusual southerly winds pushed the ice edge back. Sea ice extant is higher now than it was in 2007. They have been keeping this scam alive for 18 years without any evidence. But we get pushed this Green New Deal grift bill of goods. We're told, that solar panels and windmills are the answer for everything. This is from New Start on Twitter. Thinking that a country can run on breezes is worse than delusional. A 2-megawatt windmill is made up of 260 tons of steel that require 300 tons of iron ore and 170 tons of coking coal, all mined and transported and produced by hydrocarbons. They each consume 10,000 liters, more than 2,600 gallons of crude oil-based lubricants per year. When outdated, the wind turbines are being buried deep in forest out of public view due to the high cost associated with recycling them. A windmill could spin until it falls apart, and it will never, ever generate as much energy as was used in building it. Folks, I'm going to repeat that. This is from New Start on Twitter. A windmill could spin until it falls apart, and it will never, ever generate as much energy as was used in building it. The average daily maximum temperature in the U.S. so far this year is the 26th lowest since 1895. This is from Dr. Matthew M. Willicai. Look at the climate science community. It got it wrong. While they predicted warming would fuel more intense hurricanes, we are now actually seeing a multi-decade trend of decreasing hurricane energy globally. Time to rethink those models. But folks, the politicians are still pushing this Green New Deal agenda everywhere. In Ohio, also a red state, listen to this. Ohio lawmakers want to allow utilities to adjust homeowners' thermostats and water heaters per the New York Post. Folks, they want to be able to control the temperature you're running your house at. As far as I'm concerned, I believe in individual liberty and individual freedom. You should be able to run your house as warm as you want in the winter and as cool as you like in the summer. That's the wonderful result of living with free market capitalism. We have the ability to live as comfortably as we like and work for. And key there, to work for. That's the important part. You've worked hard for your money. You should be able to enjoy the life you want to lead as you see fit. But these career politicians, for them, it's all about control. Now they are pushing these laws, and it's happening in California too, where the state is saying it's okay for utilities to go in and turn off your power in the summer because there's not enough electricity, because they've done such a pathetic job of ensuring enough energy for their consumers. And that's what's happening here in Indiana. Our electric rates are going up so much because the politicians in our state, both establishment Republicans and Democrats, have pushed to end coal power in the state of Indiana, even though we are a coal-producing state. It is insanity. You know, folks, fossil fuels are our friend. They are not the enemy. But despite all the trillions and trillions of dollars spent on pushing the idea that coal is somehow bad, listen to this. In 1995, 96.6% of global energy consumption came from fossil fuels. 30 years later, that percentage went, guess what, folks, from 76.6% to 76.4%. That's a 0.02 percentage drop in 30 years. So we have spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars across the world demonizing fossil fuel. But folks, remember, China is still building 2 new coal-powered power plants every week. You know, coal remains the foundation of the Chinese energy system, covering close to 70% of the country's primary energy needs, and it represents 80% of the fuel used in electricity production for China. Whereas here in Indiana and across the United States, more Americans are getting their power shut off, number one, because they can't afford the higher electric rates that we all face now. You know, folks, more Americans are now getting their power shut off because they can't afford to pay the higher cost associated with these windmills and solar panels. And so people ask, well, what's the answer? The answer is to be building new coal-powered power plants. Again, China is building 2 new coal-powered power plants every week. And what is Indiana doing? We are pushing to prematurely close the coal power plants we have. They're actually working on that right now. And Indiana Republican politicians are allowing that to happen today. It is insanity. You know, they are still pushing power plants here in Indiana to be converted to natural gas. No, they should stay on coal. Natural gas is great when it's inexpensive. The problem is natural gas can fluctuate wildly in price. It's been very inexpensive for a long time, but that will not always remain the case. For coal, we have an unlimited supply, basically for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. We can keep burning coal as long as we like, and it will always be there as an inexpensive source of reliable electricity that we all need. But Indiana Republican establishment lawmakers are pushing instead, through all these commissions, to force the utilities to dump coal and go into much more expensive natural gas. That's wrong. You know, again, Indiana electric rates are going up 16% this year. They went up 17% last year, and they went up 9% the year before that. And it's all over this demonization of carbon. But folks, remember, all these people pushing this, they fly around in their private jets. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, he was just at the Vatican in a mission to terminate fossil fuels. Well, guess what? Did he go there in a sailboat? No, he probably took a private jet. You know, all these limousine liberals that go around in private jets, they talk about how bad carbon is. You know, this is from Steve Moy. Climate hypocrite Arnold Schwarzenegger is such a big believer in reducing emissions that when he was governor of California, he commuted daily from his home in Los Angeles to his office in Sacramento by private jet. And this is a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm a big believer that we have to do something about reducing pollution, and we have to do something about having people die. 7 million people die a year. But it's okay for him to go around in a private jet. Folks, it's all a con job, and when we come back, we're going to dig into how Google has admitted it restricts any online content that promotes climate change denial. This is John Russ. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting all across our beautiful state of Indiana. Folks, I like to say the fruited plain. That was a Rush Limbaugh expression that I loved from his show when he was still with us. I listened to his show for at least 25 years, starting in the 1990s, very early on, from the mid-1990s on. I spent a lot of time driving to my family's farms in various states. We have farms in Iowa, Missouri, Georgia, Illinois. And so I had a lot of time to listen to his show on the radio at times. Listening to him, he was always 100% spot on about how global warming was a giant hoax. He said that from the start, never, ever, ever wavering from that. Just like me, he would always say he loved clean air, absolutely. But he knew and understood that you and I are carbon life forms. If you go after carbon, you're going after human beings in the end. This whole global warming thing took on religious qualities early on, where people that quote unquote denied global warming were branded as heretics. And unfortunately, that is still happening today. This is from Peter Clack. Google admits it removes or restricts any online content that promotes quote unquote climate change denial. But it fails to tell users about its secretive and misleading bias, pretending there is overwhelming scientific consensus that humans cause global warming, which has been static and stable for the last 30 years, folks. Google censors and eradicates all other views on climate. What are they scared of? Again, this is from Peter Clack. Google said it wants to prevent the spread of false information about climate change as a hoax caused by human activity as the primary cause. So it suppresses and hides all other viewpoints, saying it relies on false, quote unquote, overwhelming consensus within the scientific community. Again, this is from Peter Clack. Many do disagree, including the U.S. government. It is usually only done by totalitarian regimes. Google's blatant censorship restricts freedom of speech. Folks, science should always be about facts, never, ever about personal beliefs. Unfortunately, the scientific community in the United States, as I always say, follow the money. If you are a climate scientist today, there is big money in it. And a lot of times it's funded by these giant corporations like ExxonMobil themselves because they're making money on it. They want to do this carbon sequestration baloney, and that's the polite term, bullcrap. It is all hogwash. Again, for carbon sequestration, go out and plant a tree. You're going to be doing a lot more good for the environment than these corporations that are just siphoning taxpayer funds to try to reduce carbon when we should actually be increasing it. Carbon, again, is a wonderful thing. Fortunately, there's good news now. This is from Bloomberg. Trump opens 13 million acres for coal mines to aid ailing sector. This is an article by Ari Natter, published September 29, 2025. The Trump administration is opening 13.1 million acres of federal land for leasing to coal miners to burn that fuel as part of a broad initiative to help revive the flagging industry. Folks, we should absolutely be increasing coal production. We should absolutely be increasing coal-powered power plants today. Remember, China's building 2 new coal-powered power plants every week. Instead, here in Indiana, we're trying to close them down. It is insanity. And we need these power plants because all these data centers that are coming in are sucking up all the electricity. This is from a More Perfect Union on Twitter. Electricity now costs up to 267% more than it did 5 years ago in areas near data centers. And folks, stay tuned to a future show. We're going to be talking about data centers in depth and why there should absolutely be a moratorium on any new data centers coming into Indiana. We don't have the electricity for them, but instead, remember, the establishment Republicans in Indianapolis are actually pushing these data centers, windmill companies, and solar panel pushers to actually sue local communities that are trying to stop them, to protect their communities. That's just wrong. Stay tuned to that for a future episode. It's going to be a deep dive into that. But back on global warming today and why our electric rates are going up, not just because data centers are soaking them all up, but because Indiana is restricting electricity from even being produced efficiently here in the state of Indiana. All over these claims that carbon is somehow bad. And remember, folks, they're saying it's bad because they're saying, well, the climate's changing, that the world is warming. but it's all false. Guess what? The 2024 global average temperature was 60 degrees in 2024. Guess what it was in 1880? 60 degrees, exactly the same. This is from Tony Heller. October 5th, Arctic sea ice extent is the highest in a decade, up 30% since 2012. This will not be reported by the BBC News or the New York Times or the Washington Post. And he even says this won't be reported by Fox News. Again, folks, there are powerful economic forces that leech off of the global warming scam. And if you get back to the basic science of it, it all falls apart. Remember, CO2 concentration in Earth's atmosphere to the nearest hundredth of 1% shows it is identical for the last 30 years, and it's projected to be identical for the next 40. Listen to this. In 1990, the CO2 concentration in Earth's atmosphere was 0.04%. In 2025, it was also 0.04%. Folks, it's all a scam. And these lies that renewables will replace fossil fuels, fossil fuel use is still rising. Again, despite trillions spent on renewables. All over the world, we've spent $5 trillion in renewables. Yet, the fossil fuel share of global energy is still basically the same for the last 25 years. Renewables won't replace fossil fuels because almost every part of their supply chain to make these windmills and solar panels absolutely requires fossil fuels to make them. From mining and refining to transport and manufacturing, renewables run on fossil energy. You can't build a fossil-free world using machines made by fossil fuels. Instead, it's all a shell game to bamboozle you with how your electricity is really produced. And it's all based on a scam. Again, this is a new study just published on October 25th, 2025. The headline is, New Study Finds CO2 as the Main Cause of Global Warming Physically Impossible. This is from New Start on Twitter. The CO2 climate narrative collapses under basic physics. For years, we've been told that CO2, a trace gas of just 0.04% of the atmosphere, controls the Earth's climate. But a new study in the science of climate change exposes the flaw. The data doesn't add up. 93% of warming is in the oceans, yet their temperatures jump erratically, ignoring any CO2 level. Satellite and ARGO data confirm Earth warms when solar input increases, not because of trace gases. And again, folks, I have to keep repeating this because this is key, and this is speaking the truth and shaming the devil. And Indiana career politicians don't want to hear this, but this is the truth. In Kentucky, electricity costs 12 cents per kilowatt. Indiana, it is 17 cents per kilowatt. Facts matter, but you don't hear that. You don't hear that from the Indianapolis Star. You don't hear that from any media in the state of Indiana because they're all in it for the Green New Deal grift. The new thing they're talking about now is these small nuclear reactors. Well, that's great if it works, but that's ultra expensive. Remember, folks, sometimes the most obvious solution is the solution, but everyone is ignoring it. The elephant in the room is coal is still the cheapest form of electricity, period. Again, folks, coal use hit a record high last year. So much for that energy transition. This is from Sustainability Magazine. Coal use hits all-time high despite renewable energy boom. This is from an article by James Darley published October 23rd, 2025. Overall power demand grew sufficiently to push total coal use to unprecedented levels. They are not replacing fossil fuels. And my comment on this is they're just decoration. They're for show. It's nice to have the windmill spinning to say, oh, we're green. But there's a coal plant somewhere actually fired up and running to produce the energy we all need when it's not windy. Folks, enjoy your diamond rings. They're made from carbon. They're made from coal. It's just very old compressed coal, but it's still coal. You and I are both made of carbon. You and I both breathe out 2 pounds of CO2 every day, and that's okay. That's plant food. The trees love it. So we're out of time for this episode, but thank you so much for listening. I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all again next week on the radio.